Good day, fellow peasants, and welcome back to another video. In this one, we're going to be finishing off Chapter 1 of A History of Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Goodson. And this is Chapter 1, Part 2. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, 100 to 44 BC, was born into an aristocratic family on July 12, 100 BC. He was tall and fair-headed and practiced briefly as a lawyer before becoming a brilliant military commander who conquered Gaul, which was France, in 59 to 52 BC. After his defeat of Pompey the Great in 48 BC at Pharsalus, Caesar became the undisputed leader of the Roman Republic. On his return to Italy in September 45 BC, Caesar found the streets and cities crowded with homeless people who had been forced off the land by usurers and land monopolists. 300,000 people had to be fed daily at the public granary. Usury was flourishing with disastrous consequences. The principal usurers, many of them were Jewish, were charging interest rates as high as 48% per annum. As Lucius Annaeus Seneca, 4 BC to 65 AD, the philosopher, would later remark in De Superstitione, the customs of that most criminal nation have gained such strength that they have now been received in all lands. The conquered have given laws to the conqueror. At that time, there were two main political parties, the Optimates, centered around the nobility, the Senate and the privileged few, and the Populares, who represented the citizens. Caesar immediately assumed leadership of the latter. Caesar fully understood the evils of usury and how to counter them. He recognized the profound truth that money is a national agent, created by law for a national purpose, and that no classes of men should withhold it from circulation so as to cause panics, in order that speculators could advance the rates of the interest or could buy up property at ruinous prices after such panic. I can think of a few instances in modern times that can reflect that. Caesar introduced the following social reforms. Number 1, restoration of property was done at the much lower valuations which held prior to the Civil War, 49 to 45 BC. Number 2, several remissions of rents were granted. Number 3, large numbers of poor citizens and discharged veterans were settled on allotments. 4, free housing was provided to 80,000 impoverished families. 5, soldiers' pay was increased from 123 to 225 denarii. 6, the corn dole was regulated. 7, provincial communities were enfranchised. 8, confusion in the calendar was removed by fixing it at 365 and a quarter days from 1 January 44 BC. His monetary reforms were as follows. Number 1, state debt levels were immediately reduced by 25%. Number 2, control of the mint was transferred from the patricians, usurers, to the government. 3, cheap metal coins were issued as the means of exchange. 4, it was ruled that interest could not be levied at more than 1% per month. 5, it was decreed that interest could not be charged on interest and that the total interest charged could never exceed the capital loan. 6, slavery was abolished as a means of settling debt. 7, aristocrats were forced to employ their capital and not hoard it. These measures enraged the aristocrats and plutocrats whose livelihood was now severely restricted. They therefore conspired to murder Caesar, the hero of the people. On that fateful morning of 15 March 44 BC, only 4 years after assuming power, he arrived at the Senate building unarmed, having dismissed his military guard, who had previously been in constant attendance. Surrounded by 60 conspirators, he was stabbed to death and received 23 wounds. The Golden Age, 27 to 476 AD. In 27 BC, shortly after Caesar's death and his deification, the Romans adopted the gold standard, which would have far-reaching implications for the financial stability of the empire and lead directly to its demise. Previously, during the days of the Roman Republic, gold coins were issued only in times of great need, such as during the Second Punic War on the campaign of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. There were few gold mines in Europe, except in remote places like Wales, Transylvania, and Spain, and therefore most of the supplies could only be secured from the east. This in turn required a large and expensive army, which became engaged in constant conflict at the empire's fringes. The gold coin was known as an aureus. Also in circulation were the silver denarius and various copper coins, the sestertius, dupondius, and the as. The scarcity of gold or commodity money frequently induced periods of deflation as a result of the lack of circulating means of exchange. In 13 BC, a measure of relief was provided when the weight of the gold aureus was reduced from 122 to 72 grains, and this remained the standard weight until 310 AD. However, metals continued to flow eastwards in order to pay for luxury items, religious dues, and usury payments. Furthermore, wear and tear resulted in the loss of one-third of total coinage in circulation over a 100-year period. As gold was treated as a commodity, its debasement was not tolerated. Emperor Constantine personally ordered death for counterfeiting and the burning of public minters who committed falsification. Money changers who did not report a counterfeit gold Peasant were immediately flogged, enslaved, and exiled. These regulations were effective for the Peasant, which weighed 70 grains and was slightly more than the Peasant that was still circulating in 1025 AD and weighed 68 grains. In 313 AD, Christianity was tolerated by the Edict of Milan, and from 380 AD was established as the official religion by Emperor Theodosius, 347 to 395 AD. From this time, monetary power residing in the religious authority of the Pontifex Maximus. A feature of the imperial era was social injustice and the undermining of the middle classes through excessive taxation. The Roman businessman was not a trader, but a looter of the provinces. As the homeland had a weak industrial production base, which was incapable of providing the required manufactured goods, as the monetarization of society continued with the rich parasitizing of the common man, the plebeians became more like slaves. The abolition of the jury system was symptomatic of the declining respect and importance for the common man in Roman society. Role of the Church in the decline and fall. The tax that Emperor Constantine decreed, that 1/10 of all income had to be tithed to the Christian Church, hastened the destruction of the empire. Eventually, the Church held 1/3 to 1/2 of all lands and accumulated wealth. This concentration of wealth produced a great scarcity of coinage. Money existed, but there was no circulation or distribution of goods and services. Instead of recycling the tithe money by means of investment in the community or charitable works, such as construction of hospitals, schools, and libraries, vast hoards of gold were concentrated behind the 20-foot thick walls of the fortress city of Constantinople and the Vatican fortress in Rome. In its last years, in the 5th and 6th centuries, the Roman Empire had become a parasitic organism, subject to alternating phases of inflation and deflation. Its economic ruination preceded its political ruination. There was no industrial production. Almost all food had to be imported, and usury was practiced on an unprecedented scale. The wealth of the empire that was not held by the church was controlled by 2,000 Roman families. The rest of the population lived in poverty. Consequences. The implosion of the western half of the empire in 476 AD after repeated military incursions by the Goths and Vandals resulted in the Dark Ages. A punishing multi-century deflationary depression followed. According to the United States Silver Commission of 1876, the metallic money of the Roman Empire at its height amounted to 1.8 billion, but by the end of the Dark Ages it had shrunk to 200 million. Agriculture was reduced to subsistence level. Large sailing vessels vanished as there was no trade. Commerce stagnated, arts and science were lost, and the knowledge of cement making disappeared. Major factors in the decline of the Roman Empire were the concentration of wealth, the absence of mining deposits for industrial production, and the vast importation of non-white slaves with the resultant degradation of the genetic value of the nation. By the 4th century AD, as a result of the continuing decline in Roman female fertility, slaves outnumbered citizens by 5 to 1. The most important economic reason was an inadequate supply of an inexpensive circulating medium of money, and the false notion that money should be a commodity. Thus, from an economic perspective, the lessons from the fall of Rome are that a dishonest economic system will inevitably contribute to the forces of dissolution. No society can survive a false economic system. For any society to function and prosper, it is absolutely fundamental that the means of exchange be issued free of debt and interest by the legal authority of the state as representatives of the people in perpetuity. That is the end of chapter 1. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you peasants later.